Depending upon where you're being. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you're calling in from. Bonjour et bonsoir à tous. I'm Cara Lund, the CEO and founder of Lund Global. I've been a longtime FACNY member and FACNY HR Forum member since its inception in 2016, and I'm really glad that you're here. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We will be recording this session, and if you do have questions, there will be a time to ask and answer those questions at the end of the program. And if you wouldn't mind putting your questions into the Q&A box separate from the chat, we'd appreciate it. Cliff will be curating those questions and asking them at the end of the program. I would be remiss if I didn't say that today's workshop is co-presented by the French-American Chamber of Commerce's HR Forum, as well as French Tech Boston. And I'd like to thank Ms. Zina Geshan, who is the Chief of Staff of French Tech Boston, as well as the always lovely and gracious Ludwine Wolzik, who is the Executive Director of the FACNY. I am also thrilled to be co-moderating this panel discussion with the fun and fabulous Cliff Watkin of Circle Strategies, and who also heads the HR Forum. Hi, Cliff.
Hey, Cara. Thank you for the fun and fabulous.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Absolutely true. So, since the focus of this program is on sharing your story, do you have a story to share from your professional or personal life that ties to your work?
I do. It happened a long, long time ago, and let's call it the mid-'80s. This is before unconscious bias was a topic that people were speaking about. I was in a conference room. I was an HR manager, and I was in a conference room with about 10 people, and we were having a conversation about the new HRIS system that the large organization that I was working with was going to be implemented. One of the women on the technology team was speaking, and the conversation about price came up. And she, just in regular conversation, said to the person who was managing the negotiation, "Did you Jew them down?" And I, being Jewish myself, was very taken aback. And I said, "What did you say?" And she repeated it as though it was just regular conversation, a regular comment that people make. I said, "That's extremely offensive. I'm Jewish. Jews are not known for negotiating people down. That's not a trait that they carry around. And so I would like you to not say that anymore. It's extremely offensive." And that was it. So I learned my lesson young in the working world that there were people out there who had these opinions and used these colloquialisms that they thought were regular language. And it was wrong, just very wrong. What about you, Cara? Tell us a story about you.
I have a number of stories. I was thinking about it, downloading it yesterday, and I'm thinking, my God, I'm white, straight, and Protestant. So if I have this many stories, I can't imagine what it's like for people who don't fit that profile. But it is tight. My business really started from unconscious bias. I was teaching performing arts classes. I saw a clear and present need in the department of which the students were suffering. I offered a proposal, and which I also saw as a way to get some regular income for myself. And that proposal was taken behind closed doors, and someone else is still benefiting from my initiative. But I was working with a couple of professional people in class who were expressing to me that they didn't think they were being taken seriously. And they thought it was because their first language was not English. So although there were some soft skills that needed to be polished, it wasn't really bad, but they were also losing confidence in the process. So I was thinking, my goodness, I have all of this experience in phonetics and performing in languages and stage deportment and on-camera acting and managing nerves, this is a perfect skill set to bring to people who feel a little disadvantaged in helping them to step up and step forward and shine. So that allowed me to get away from the college, which was really taking advantage of me, not helping me get ahead, and help others to really allow their talents to shine a little bit more brightly in a way to minimize whatever impact that unconscious bias was having on them in the future. So I just continue to build out my coaching services to the point at which I've been able to go to 3 continents and work with people from over 20 different languages, as well as, of course, Americans. So that was my story. There's another story I do want to share quickly, though, that is probably more relevant to everyone, in that this is an example of positive intent, which I think we find everywhere. And I was at an event in Paris a couple of years ago, and I was able to meet the speaker of this event, who is a very prominent French figure in both French politics and French society. He gave me his email address, and after an exchange, he invited me to a meeting. All the women that I talked to said, "Yeah, you go, girl. He sees the value in what you do." And the men went directly to, "You better watch out for him. Do not meet him in a hotel room. Let me know if you want me to wait outside and look through the windows and make sure you're okay. Call me when it's done." So we had this very different perspective from the men and the women over this meeting that I was invited to. But it made me realize how important women's networking is and the power of women's networking, because women, when we aren't in our own way, we really see other women as being pure potential. And we can go there immediately to the pure potential in other women. And I think it seems to be a little bit more challenging for men sometimes. They have to go through corridors before they get there. But as much as I love them, and they've been my champions, but I hope that we can change that so that everybody can see women and everyone as pure potential first and foremost. So that's my stories.
Great.
So Cliff, I think didn't you have a story about how your business ties into unconscious bias?
It does, absolutely. So when I started my firm many years ago, I began hiring candidates and very qualified HR and employee benefits professionals. And I started to notice that there wasn't a lot of diversity on my team. And then the conversation of diversity came up in everyone's mind, and workplace and so forth, wherever you were. And I made a conscious decision to make that change in my organization. Mm-hmm. And so by making that change in my organization with my team, it also prompted me to start getting into the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we provide those consulting services to our clients today.
Great. Well, we have 3 fabulous presenters who are ready and willing to pick up the conversation from here. So I'm very happy to present Linda Stewart, who is a self-employed management consultant and strategic advisor based here in Massachusetts, as well as Jose Perez, the CEO of Rhodes Consulting Group, also based here in the Boston area. And finally, we have Ms. Caroline Vaquette, who is an expert in DEI and an executive partner of our office based in Bethesda, Maryland. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. So our focus is on sharing our stories. So my first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself in relation to a personal experience that you've had with unconscious bias? And I'll take the answer from anyone. Linda, would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
When I thought about this question, I originally thought about sort of my own experience with it, which I'll just tell you, early on in my career as the first woman hired by KPMG in their New York office. It was gender bias explicitly, and unconsciously that I experienced early in my career. And at this point in my career, I have to sadly say that I'm experiencing unconscious bias around aging. But those stories, I didn't think were nearly as powerful as the one from a client of mine. So that's really what I'd like to share. This is an African-American couple, both very successful in their careers. And they decided to go into business together, and they wanted to set up, I'm trying to protect names here a little bit, but they wanted to set up a mailing service. It wasn't the US Post Office, so it was one of the other two. And they wanted to set up a franchise operation in what was then a very elite, predominantly white area. And they knew, or they believed, that being Black was going to hinder their ability to become a franchisee in that geographic region. So they consciously chose to override their natural instincts, their voice, and everything. And they conducted all of their negotiation with the company over the phone. And this was pre-Zoom. So all of it was over the phone. And they got to the point where the company said, we're very interested in you. We want you to come to our offices for the final interview. And they again said, because of our schedule and this and that, they were not able to do that. So they had the final interview again over the phone, and they were selected as the franchisees for this area in Boston. And at that point, they flew out to sign the closing documents in a big, sort of corporate boardroom. And they walked in the room, and the man who headed up the whole operation looked at them and said, "Well played." That I was so moved by that experience that a lot of my consulting is now focused on minority businesses to try to help with that. And I continued to work with them to help them navigate that. They're in a different business, but experiencing similar problems. So maybe we can talk about that later, but I thought that was a very powerful story.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Jose, would you like to add to that? Would you like to share a story?
Sure. I believe one of the personal stories we have was a little bit more towards an interview process that we dealt with a particular client of ours. They were at that time securing a position that would deal directly with one of their largest and most important clients. And at this particular moment, they needed to get some sort of representation that represented them as a business, kind of company values, but at the same time will be able to serve as the main point of contact for a very important client. And we started going through the round of interviews. We started overseeing the different applications, and we came across a very important application, very prepared individual. They knew what they were doing. They had the experience, right? But then it was brought up to us that a little bit of their appearance was not up to date in order for them to be the first person of interacting with their largest contractor. And then we started looking more into this, right? And started making our own interpretation of what this would mean or what would actually dictate for the business, right? And then I started having a little bit of gut check and saying, geez, am I actually either A, discriminated against this person, or B, having these biases that if he or she does not look a standard quote way, would not allow us to advise this company to actually hire them because they will not represent them well, right? At the end of the day, I think the company did the right thing. They were able to put those items aside, but I think it was problematic to think it in a way that we were going through at the moment, because we kind of crumbled the resume after, and we were focused more on the appearance than anything else, which should have been one of the last things that we were paying attention to, if the person possessed the individual skill set and the professionalism that we needed. But due to the unconscious bias that we all had in our minds, we had a little bit of second doubts in regards to actually integrating this candidate to the actual firm. So that's kind of one of the stories that we have.
Jose, did you end up moving forward with this candidate, or did they not end up making the grade?
We did not move forward with the candidate, but I am happy to report that we were not moving forward with the candidate based on professional items that did not allow us to move forward with the candidate. It was not based on the actual appearance of the candidate,
Mhm.
which is important to note. But we did spend more time than we should have in the actual appearance, which was somewhat concerning to us, right? And after a while, figuring out, I think these are items that we need to somewhat control for the time being and for any future endeavors that we do.
Just one small comment on that story. I experienced something very similar. It was reversed, though. It was a board member of an organization who was given the last evaluation of the finalist candidate for the job. The finalist candidate was African American, and the board member was white, and said, I think we need to go back and look for somebody who fits the right mold. And I said to the president of the company, tell your board member you will have a lawsuit on your hands in 2 seconds if you do not accept this candidate, because the candidate was above the other candidates that were in the pool. Very qualified for the job, perfect match for the organization in terms of the style and what they needed. And it was just this person's perception of what somebody in this position should be rather than what they are.
Wow.
Cliff, can I just ask you, did they end up hiring the
Yes.
person? Oh, that's great. That's
Yep,
great.
that was a
You
good
know,
positive
that's
outcome.
such a great story, because unconscious bias is really not always thinking less of a person because of a bias. It's also thinking more of people that are like you.
Right.
And sometimes people don't always think about it that way.
Thank you.
Caroline?
Yeah. So, I work for almost 20 years for global companies. And even if they were really great and great company culture, finally, I really have felt also unconscious bias, because unconscious bias, all humans have unconscious bias, and they are just natural and we can't avoid them. So I especially experienced unconscious bias when I changed company for the first time. I really felt judged as a newcomer. The company has codes and habits, and I had the impression that all my action and behaviors were analyzed. So it was really the first time I really felt unconscious bias. And after, also having a double career with my husband was not an easy one for me. It also made me experience unconscious bias that I really felt very unfair. For example, being a woman, a married woman, I really felt like a lot of women that leaders may think I didn't need or deserve a promotion or want the next promotion or raise as much as a man or a single woman. So now I start to speak up on this situation. For a long time, I didn't speak up on this, but now, as I didn't see things moving forward so fast for women, as the percentage of women in leadership team remain low. And we all know that it will take more than maybe 100 years to achieve equality if we keep the same pace. I really start to speak up, especially today, in France. This is a special day because starting from today at 9:22, women in France start to work for nothing, because as they are less paid than men, from today, they are working for nothing. So I really felt unconscious bias because no one can take advantage of the work or expertise of a woman, and no pay her like a man, only for the reasons that she is married or not perceived as in need, or or having some consideration. Sometimes I really felt unconscious bias where when people in organization think for the employee and don't ask to directly to the employee, they are doing the question and the answer in the same time. So
Exactly.
this is a story I wanted to share with all of you.
I have one quick question. When you started to push back, can you share an example of what the other or how the other person acted or reacted?
Finally, this is after several experience where I finally realized and start to speak up. I think I was too shy, maybe when I was younger also, to really speak up. So company always find other reasons sometimes, and don't want to assume also this kind of a statement. So I can't share more detail of that because maybe I was too shy to
It's okay.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you. That's a great story. Great perspective.
So our second question is concerning other people, and we'd like to know, because unconscious bias shows up in so many different ways. It looks differently, it sounds differently, sometimes it feels different. It can surprise us. So we want to share all the ways that we've experienced, or as many as we can, to notice what it looks, sounds, and feels like. How have you witnessed it against others, and what did you do in that moment when you were present?
I can take this one if you want. I'll start.
Sure.
Right. I guess one of the items that I could always goes into my mind, it's the interpretation of criminal offender records as we know today, and how we are being biased to somewhat reintegrate that particular workforce back into our communities, right? I remember when I was working at a particular company, and we have to do background checks. It is what it is. We have to do it through different particular regulations. And we saw a very great individual coming through the door, and he had a criminal background that came above, right? And one of the items that we needed to discuss is how to actually interpret and read the criminal background, right? I believe a lot of the biases are somewhat being created out of not understanding the information is that being presented to you, right? One of them is that we saw that the person had different entries on their background, but in essence, they were only pleading down to one particular item in their background. And this happened actually about 15 years ago from the time that we were actually interviewing them, right? And at that point, we were saying, why does this still show up in their background, right? And why is it even relevant and important today? When from time to time, right, if you moved far enough to a different city or country, it would not matter, right? We would not create those sort of assumptions towards your pedigree or your particular professionalism. With this particular candidate, it was about understanding what we understood from a particular person in their actual background check. But at the same time, I think the education was key because the hiring manager did not interpret this as we did, and they just saw it as they had a tainted background, right? And for us was, okay, there's a lesson to be learned here. The person has a background that happened 15 years ago, and second to that, you've seen these as separate entries or separate different offenses when there's only one, but it's irrelevant because it happened too long ago. We shouldn't be counting this against it, right? And I think what we're going through today and what we're seeing today in the short labor workforce, and we're seeing that people are not being able to be rapidly deployed into employment. I think this is more relevant today than any other time in the world. We need to be able to stop doing the traditional filtering of screening that would not allow someone to be hireable again, but at the same time allow the chances for someone to be employed regardless of their background. And one of the biases behind that was this person would not perform well just based on what we could see on a piece of paper that literally happened 15 years ago, and that's problematic.
Mhm. That's true. A lot can change in 15 years, and you could learn your lesson and essentially be a different person, but you've still got this record, and if somebody can't see beyond it, it's really tough.
Want me to go next?
Sure.
Sure. I want to wrap up the last story about the couple in the mailing business to just say that their franchise turned out to be the fastest growing and most successful in the country. So it really had a very happy ending.
That's great.
So this story is another client, African-American family that runs childcare centers, and they put them into exclusive neighborhoods, so they're mostly teaching and taking care of professional families and their children. And they wanted to expand their operation and have multiple locations. And there's a lot of development, real estate development going on in Boston. And so they began to call, they needed ground floor kind of exposure. So they would call and they'd have conversations with people about what they were doing and who they were. And people would take their call and be very interested and set up meetings. And then they would tell them, oh, they're not interested. They would always have some excuse that childcare was too much liability, which it's not their liability, or some other reason they decided they wanted a restaurant, which was crazy because restaurants have a much shorter life than childcare centers. So we talked about it, and I think it was the unconscious bias that was the problem for them. So I started to go and meet with the developers about a childcare center, and every one of them took my call, took a meeting, and we're now actually in the process of taking it to the next level. But very compelling story about how this unconscious bias is still very much out there. So this one is live and going on right now.
Linda, can I ask, from the organization's perspective, what was their commentary when you discussed that it was unconscious bias?
Well, it was more of a, we express it as, well, gee, I'm curious. What is the reason that there's so much interest? And then when we go to meet them, there is no interest. And so we just talked about various things that it could be and how to respond to them. One being the insurance question, but the other one being, let's be realistic about the bias, conscious and unconscious, that's out there. And let's try to learn if that is the problem and then come up with solutions about how we're going to deal with it. And so we sort of undertook this mission to go out and see if the experience would be different with, sort of, another white Protestant, Cara. And that seemed much more acceptable to the marketplace as a whole. Sad that it's still that real in our current environment, but it is.
And the success of getting development.
They are in two new.
Money and
yep, they're in two new developments right now. Partnered with an organization that's helping them raise capital because it's so difficult for minorities to raise capital today. Again, very, very much tied into bias. And they're doing very, very well. COVID was a big setback for them, but coming out of it, they're doing well and they're moving forward with their growth plans.
Great. Excellent.
So just a learning that sometimes you have to understand it and you can't change the world overnight. So you have to find ways of helping people work through it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in that situation, when you're confronted with somebody's being biased against me, that just makes no sense. In today's day and age, people's instincts are to just throw up their arms and say, I give up. And it sounds like they persevered.
They persevered. Yep.
It's great.
Thank you. Caroline, did you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, so having worked in different continents and country, you know, I have witnessed very strong cultural bias linked to the history of the country and culture. You know, when people come from another country, you always have a deep stereotype and say, oh, he's Indian, oh, he's Chinese, oh, he's French, you know, or she's French. You have people have an idea of different culture, and also linked to the history between country, between wars, or between, you know, stories, past story between countries. So I used to live in Asia for 4 years, so I really discover this cultural bias working abroad from Europe. And also, you know, working in the DNI space, I see also, I have a lot of testimonial about, for example, Asian AIDS. And I help people to think differently about what can happen for Asian people. You know, currently, when someone meets an Asian people, they think, oh, it will bring me COVID, you know, it will get, I will get COVID with Asian people, because yes, it's true, COVID come from China. But now Asian people, we all know that there is microaggression, so unconscious bias imply finally microaggression for this kind of people. And very, very few people in organization take time to discuss with their Asian people in order to know what they live every day as microaggression and face every day with every day. So really being aware of this kind of situation help people to act and to change also their behavior regarding this kind of stereotype and unconscious bias.
Thank you.
Caroline, a quick question. You have the very, very international perspective. There's been a lot of conversation in some continents of the world about xenophobia and it impacting decisions that governments are making, or where cities are going to build and things like that. Could you shed some light on that with your experience, and if you have some perspectives on different countries, just to understand where they stand in that category?
At work, or more globally in
globally. Or if it's easier for you to do it at work, that's fine too. I just would like to hear internationally, just if you have a perspective of one country doing it this way or another country handling it this way, or how people are reacting when those kinds of examples come up that you just described.
Yeah, you know, for example, if we speak about sustainability, you know, each country always think that they are best or better than other country, you know. Americans think they are best because they have all these big park where, of course, there is a lot of nature. But on the other hand, you know, other country who use less cars and are less business oriented also think finally they are more ecological. So it's a question of perspective and how people see the things and analyze the situation. So it's really deep, and that's why it's really difficult to change this deep stereotype or deep thinking finally. So that's why people need to be intentional and try to say, okay, this is unconscious bias, or this is a stereotype, or this is maybe not fair. So let's take a moment to analyze better the situation in order to stop summarizing something that it's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
So my next question, we've already touched on this just a little bit, but systemic racism has a long history in the United States through the television programs we grew up with, then commercials, residential segregation. It was baked into police departments and voting rights and all kinds of things. So what organizational systems or practices do you recognize are still in place today that go largely unrecognized, but help to promote implicit bias or inequities of any kind?
So I'll start that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the interview process is still very much flawed. And it's not always, it's not conscious, right? I think a lot of people are saying they need to embrace diversity, but they continue to hire people that are just like them. I've seen just dozens of really qualified people who get chopped off the list of candidates to advance just because of their name or the clothes they wore or something that they said that was a cultural response. So I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think it has to start with the interview process and start at, even at board levels. Eastern Bank is a great example of this, where their CEO and chairman of the board made a commitment to diversity, and he started with it on the board. He said, I want our board to have the diversity of our customer base. And he hired every ethnicity, every gender, he's been really, really thoughtful about that. And I think it's made a big difference in the organization. I think that has to happen inside the organization too, that there needs to be a real commitment to that. And people need help understanding how to get around some of the challenges that Jose talked about, a couple of them. When that happens, if somebody has a background record or they don't like someone's appearance, what are other responses? Or do you interview people blindly? Again, Cliff, I don't have the answers. You probably look at this kind of thing all the time. But if you don't start in the interview process, you're never going to have a fully diverse workforce or a workforce that represents your customer base. I think that's the real message I want to send to business leaders, is this is bottom line. This isn't just something that's a nice to have. When your people represent your customer base, you have the opportunity to be a much more successful company, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Linda. It needs to come from the top. And probably this incredible speech from Air Force Lieutenant Jen, who addressed to his team about racism incidents. I will share today on my LinkedIn profile, so you can watch it again. This speech is really incredible for CEO to use this kind of speech in order to make sure that there is no way to do racism inside the company, inside the organization, because if a CEO can have this kind of speech, it won't happen. The people will know that there is no choice to make it differently. And I agree also, starting from the recruitment process, but also to career development and succession planning. So there is really unconscious bias are really human. We have all unconscious bias as human, and the only way that organization can build unconscious bias into their system is to be intentional and to embed the diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything they do. So they can raise really awareness of people's own biases and empathy for others. So for me, company can't just provide, some unconscious bias training and give a few talk or put out statements and expect unconscious biasing to go away. So that's why they need further action.
Thank you.
Great. I wanted to just add a little bit of commentary that happened this weekend about this topic specifically. I was talking with my family about the presentation that was coming up, And I was asked the question, well, how are you going to treat this situation with somebody who's coming into the organization with this background, and how are you going to treat Y situation with this individual coming into the organization? You're always going to have unconscious bias, or you're always going to have differences. And my response to that was exactly what Caroline said. Unconscious bias is about behavior. And your idea, or your suggestion, not idea, sorry, your suggestion about starting at the recruiting time and also from the top down is really important. But if you want your organization to follow the protocol of unconscious bias, where you're treating everybody the same, everybody should be trained in understanding and how to behave when unconscious bias occurs. So we say we need to train our organizations and we need to put training in, but I'm a proponent of just looking at it from a slightly different perspective. And the perspective is, it's onboarding. You're coming to work in my organization, and so therefore I'm going to teach you how to do your job, but I'm also going to teach you how to behave. And you're going to behave in a way that matches our mission and values. And if you can't perform in that way, just like you don't come to work on time, or just like you break a smoking policy or a drug testing policy, you're breaking our unconscious bias policy. And so therefore, a performance improvement plan is much easier to manage. And the he said, she said liability goes down because it's policy. Did you go through the training? Did you go through continuous training? Whatever it is, you're able to fall back on this requirement, just like you're saying you were supposed to use this machine to produce this tool, and you didn't. And therefore, we sold a poor product to our client. And I'm just trying to, it's the same thing you're all saying, which is provide training. I'm just trying to show a different perspective, and that is, have it be part of onboarding. You onboard all of your employees today to understand how to behave. And then anybody who comes in goes through this onboarding so that they learn how to behave within the organization as well as learn their job.
So as we look towards the future, looking ahead, what trends do you see in organizations, or what do you want business leaders to know that they don't know now?
I think global companies have some program to develop their people and unconscious bias, and also to have a DEI program. I really see a trend for small and medium-sized companies who really are competing in terms of talent, So they really want to take care of their people to retain them. So we know that the US market is tight, so the job market. So that's why they realize that being inclusive will help them to retain and to attract their talent. Now it doesn't go fast as we would like, but we really see a trend here regarding company with less than 500 employees or 200 employees. So that's really great, because they start to realize that they can improve their company culture to be more inclusive, and this is really what we see at our office. Yeah.
And I think the next part of the conversation that I would ask from your perspective, Caroline, is if we're going to train everybody and we're going to hold them accountable to behave and not conduct themselves poorly, it would be nice to have some way to measure that on a regular basis. I think you have some experience in that area, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So in order to make some progress, you need to measure. And this is also my own experience. When I was a D&I head in a global company, finally I did a lot of things, run a diversity week and so on. But finally, when I look at my figures at the end, I say, oh my God, I lose some woman share, So you really need to be focused on what matter and make sure that your action are the best one to drive change, but also you need to follow the KPI. So that's why you absolutely need to have some reports in order to follow your metrics in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity. And for also global companies who are here today, the diversity metrics are really important when you are doing your succession planning and your talent review, because we have the recruitment process, but after the talent review need also, I know that global companies have sophisticated tool to manage performance, potential, and so on. But there is a metric who is missing, is diversity. So if during this talent review, and this is what L'Oréal is doing now, for each talent review, they are also looking their diversity figures in order to make sure that they will progress in terms of gender diversity, in terms of racial diversity. So this is really important to have this kind of tool as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And I guess I would just build on some of the things you've said already, Caroline. One of them is, obviously to give the training in the onboarding, Cliff, I thought was a great thing. But I guess I would also be an advocate for some patience. In the United States, in a lot of places, we don't have as many cultures working together. This whole issue became really clear to me when I was working in Luxembourg and building an operation with fluency in 6 languages. So what I was really doing, I thought I was building a multilingual operation, but I was really building a multicultural operation. And that's when I really realized, and you said this before, Caroline, is that this goes back hundreds of years, some of these biases. And I think it's a great topic to have on the radar screen, and you can't manage what you can't measure. So measuring is really great. But I think opening up the dialogue is where we start, but we all have to be really clear that this is just the beginning, right? That it's going to take a while and it has to be actively managed. It's not about, the expression here that I hear a lot is that it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And the kinds of things that Cliff and Caroline were talking about, I think put us in that progress to get closer to that place where we all feel that unconscious bias is significantly reduced or eliminated. But patience.
Yeah, and we are speaking about trends, but where I was surprised is very, very few company and organization have a written D&I strategy. They have some action, they have some program, but very few have D&I strategy written. So, and we know that for everything you do, you need to have a strategy and not to jump into action. And so that's why it's really also important to make this progress. You mentioned, Linda, to have this strategy also to make some progress.
Thank you. Jose, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, at the same time, I think it's important to also broadcast the importance of being inclusive, right? And being able to provide some sort of a culture of different vibes, of different cultures, of different atmospheres, because this also generates different results, right? I think when we started looking at the inclusion of different environments, we will be able to see what the benefit is for the entire firm, right? We live in societies that are becoming more diverse, that are becoming more inclusive of different items. But I think we also need to understand what the importance is as a company and as humans when it comes to doing somewhat of inclusion for our companies and our lives as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I totally agree, because we know that Hispanic will become Spanish will be the first languages in a few years in the US, and we still have a few Hispanic people also in leadership position in the US. So things need to change, and this is also linked to unconscious bias, and a lot of things need to be measured in order to progress also on this item.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, we are at time for our Q&A section. Cliff, do we have any questions?
We do. I'm going to read out the first question. It says, how can we monitor improvement, whether behaviors truly changed over time in our organization? And how can we hold teams accountable? Who would like to answer that one?
I can certainly take a shot at it. Can you just let me see which one you're answering to, Cliff, because I have a few in this chat box.
No, it's in the Q&A box.
Sorry, that's why I'm lost. So I think it's important to see what the actual society is doing and what leaders in the industry is doing. So we look, for example, and I know Harvard, it's currently integrating this and will be integrating this down the line. One of them, for example, it's removing the last names from particular applications, either last names and first names. So this doesn't become an issue of the actual hiring filter, right? Another one is also deleting the educational piece. It's not the education, it's irrelevant, but what we're not trying to do is be conscious about the fact of where did you go to school, right? Did you go to an Ivy League or did you go to community college? If you check the box, we're going to know that you have an undergrad, a master's, or a PhD. That's important. But what is not important, where the information is coming from, because that's also where the bias is coming in, right? So we have organizations that are really starting to develop these particular procedures, right? Another one is being able to see your diversity and inclusion somewhat data and demographics, and from an HR perspective, being held accountable and saying, okay, how many diverse candidates are we hiring? What sort of actually backgrounds are they coming in, right? And why do we not have more positions of power that would allow diversity within our particular organization? And one of them is just managing your HR as you're managing the regular piece of your business, looking at it from a particular standpoint where you say, okay, let me see your metrics. Let me see where we are. If you measure turnaround, right, do you measure actually diversity, right? And if you do that, then also are you measuring the way that we're hiring and that we're being somewhat transparent and being appropriate in regards of how we actually recruit someone. The same thing happens into training. The same thing happens into team management and team leadership. Are we being somewhat resourceful and equal to the opportunities that are out there, and we're not actually going towards the same people time to time to make sure that they actually are delivering all the projects? So these are the items that we could do as an organization, but at the same time, I think it's accountability from an HR perspective and as leaders for us to know and understand that we need to be the example of the firm to follow.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add some suggestions on holding teams accountable or holding individuals accountable?
Yeah, so from my experience, what we do with organization we guide is really to encourage a company to share their D&I plan. And after, when they share the D&I plan during a town hall, for example, have a kind of a platform in order to engage everyone and to, inclusion is not only one person in the company, it needs to be everyone. So that's why it's difficult to move things forward. So that's why you need to have the right tool in order to engage and to make accountable everyone, but in the right direction. So you need to guide them with your strategy, and after ask people also to propose some ideas and some action in order to maybe increase racial diversity or increase awareness, etc. So this is really what we do in order to create more accountability.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add quick, I'll be very succinct here. I think involving employees is really important, and asking some group of employees how they think you're doing in terms of progress, and use that as a measurement. If you do an employee questionnaire, I think there are some DNI and unconscious bias questions now that will help you measure that from a trend standpoint. And I'll go back to my point about having a diverse board and setting an example for the rest of the organization. And those would be three more I'd add.
Great, thank you. All right, we have another question. What small ways can employees have an impact on DEI strategies within their organization when they're not part of leadership? So two things that come to mind, I'm going to just jump right in and give my answer. Two things that come to mind is my story that I spoke about at the beginning, where I was, I wasn't even in management at the time that story occurred. I was just an individual contributor in the organization on this team. And I stood up and I didn't even think about it. I just said, this is wrong. Like that's what I did. Now, a lot of people find it difficult to do that and speak up. And Caroline, you spoke about that too. I think the most important impact that individuals can do in the organization, if they're not even on any DEI committee or part of leadership, or even if the organization is not even leading a DEI strategy, just get the courage to speak up and hold people accountable for their poor behavior. It's not about breaking laws and you have to go to HR and have it be out of control and make it be such a big deal. It's just really about behavior and holding people accountable. And the more people that can do that will help that behavior to stop. That's option number one. And option number two is suggest having if the organization is leading the DEI strategy from the leadership perspective, just make sure that there's a committee and people have a voice. And you can easily ask the leadership to do that so that you can participate. Anybody else want to add something? Because we have a couple more minutes. And I have one more question. Should I ask it, or anybody want to suggest something?
Is it the one from Eric, Cliff?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure his question got answered.
Yep. So that question is about resources to really understand about biases and what statistics there are out there. And yes, it's true. If you don't have the knowledge, it's very hard to make decisions. So this is my segue into ending the program. We have taken on the initiative to provide a lot more resources than we have in the past. And so for this event, we asked you to do some homework, to do some reading and get up to speed on what's happening with unconscious bias today. We're going to now transfer that reading material to the FACNY HR Forum LinkedIn group, where you'll be able to get that information along with this recording of this webinar, as well as materials suggested by Eric, answers to some other questions that I wrote down that we didn't get to. So definitely look there and you can take advantage of those resources. And what we're also going to do is provide the opportunity for you to continue this conversation and create micro conversations that you can participate in on the LinkedIn group. We'll also have our unconscious bias quiz that Harvard Business School put out, and you can take it and see where you fall, and maybe it'll be a learning experience for you. Lastly, I'd like to just remind everybody we have our next event coming up, which is December 3rd, 12 to 1:30. It's going to be a little bit longer. It's a lunch and learn. It's an in-person lunch and learn event. And we're going to discuss how to maximize diversity on your board. That was a very important point that came up today, that it should start with the top, and having your board understand the impact of diversity is a good place to start. So we're going to have that discussion then. thank you all very much for participating. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Kara, and thank
My
you,
pleasure.
FACNY and French Tech, for putting this idea together and getting the word out to organizations about a complicated and difficult topic. I hope folks have learned something today and felt the impact of unconscious bias from some of these stories. And there's definitely an opportunity to continue that conversation. And we're going to try and do that on our the FACNY HR Forum LinkedIn group. So check that out. We'll make that available to you all after. And feel free to join the LinkedIn group and continue the conversation. Kara, would you like to say any last words?
Nothing. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists for being here and giving your time. It makes a huge difference to our learning opportunities. And I'm just grateful for your time and your attention and everyone else who was able to join us today. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.